So it was the combination of an antidepressant putting me into mania, hypomania, and lithium working. And I'm still on it to this day. It's always been a go-to, even though I take, throughout the time I've added other ones off or on. But if lithium works, that's a pretty good sign that you have bipolar.
This is MindBody Matters with Greg Rennie.
Welcome back to MindBody Matters. Today is a special day. It is World Bipolar Day. Why March 30th? Well, March 30th is the birthday of Vincent van Gogh, the painter, who they found out much later on after his death that he did have bipolar disorder. And the focus of World Bipolar Day is to bring world awareness to bipolar, eliminate social stigma and discrimination, and to provide information that will educate and improve sensitivity towards the illness. It's to remember our strengths and resilience and successes, as well as acknowledge that much work remains ahead. I definitely agree. Sandra Steiner, who was our guest today, is a successful fitness professional. She's a motivational speaker, mother, and advocate living with bipolar disorder. Sandra considers herself to be thriving-ish, and thriving-ish as part of her title of her book, A Sparkling Tornado. Today, let's talk about bipolar disorder. Let's talk about World Bipolar Day. Our guest today in the studio, Sandra Steiner. Sandra, thanks very much for agreeing to be on our show.
Thank you for having me.
As we talked on the phone, I think it was about a few days ago or a week ago, I came across your book, A Sparkling Tornado, on Amazon, had a chance to read it, and I thought, hey, today's World Bipolar Day, and what better way to kind of find out where we're at right now regarding bipolar, understanding our stigma, than talk to someone that is bipolar. So I appreciate that you set aside the time. And we're both in Ontario, right?
Yeah, that's not often that happens.
Yeah, so we can talk about Canadian healthcare, the pros and cons and the gaps for healthcare. I just want to talk about what World Bipolar Day is. We both know it, but just for the audience to know that every March 30th, which, by the way, is the birth date of Vincent van Gogh, one of my favorite, or I would say the favorite painter of mine, that's his birthday. And it was understood that, many, many years later, that there's a very good chance that he had bipolar disorder. So that's why it's March 30th. And the whole idea is to bring world awareness to bipolar disorder. And I find it interesting on their website. They say to eliminate social stigma and discrimination. I don't know if we're going to do it in 1 year. I don't think we're going to eliminate it.
I think we can aim to reduce it, especially with the illnesses. So I find mental health, people are very comfortable talking about. We have Bell Let's Talk Day. People can say, I need a mental health day. We're very comfortable now talking about that, but people aren't comfortable talking about mental illness, especially the lifelong ones like bipolar or schizophrenia. We're here to talk about bipolar, but that's mental illness isn't a word that we hear nearly as much as mental health. And there is stigma to mental illness. The stigma has been reduced to say mental health.
I'm sure you came across for yourself your own stigma and other people's stigma. And I'd like to know more about that and what possibly we can do to reduce. And I agree. I don't think we're going to be able to eliminate, but that's the goal. So your book is out there on Amazon and other places that people can find your book, A Sparkling Tornado, a memoir of living, and I like this part, of living and thriving-ish with bipolar disorder. Why write a book? What brought you to the point of being an author? Because you haven't written a book before. This is your first time, right?
I have not. Yeah, this is my first time, although I have always enjoyed writing very therapeutically. I love workbook type things. I think when we met previously, I was talking about thought journals. And any issue I have, I do a lot of thought journals, or they're also known as thought records. So it's always been therapeutic for me. And then I went on a friend of mine convinced me to go on a writing and yoga retreat.
I'm picturing people in those yoga positions, writing. I don't see that. I'm sure it was like separate from the actual
It was completely separate. We started the day with yoga, and I was very lucky to go because it was in Spain, and we were writing under olive trees. So the
Nice.
writing coach, her name was Anne Bokma, and she was also a journalist. And I went there. I knew the goal was to write a 6-minute memoir, but I never thought I would write about my story of bipolar because I keep it pretty close to my chest because I had a lot of negative experiences in my younger years when there was a lot more stigma. And I can't get over that. I'm working on getting over that. So I ended up, she's also a journalist. She pulled these questions out of me. And I ended up with this 6-minute memoir that I was quite proud of. And when I read it to the group at the end, I saw tears in people's eyes, but I also heard laughter as I read it. Laughter because I interspersed, just like in my book, Can't Be Too Heavy. And that inspired me to keep going, not knowing at the time whether it would just be for me or whether I'd put it out there to the world. But I have put it out there to the world.
What was your thinking just before you published it? How did you feel about having this out in the world and for someone that keeps things kind of close, you're telling the public, and I read your book, a lot of details about what has happened to you and hospitalizations and how bipolar has impacted your life. What was your thoughts once it was out there and you saw it out there?
Yeah, well, a lot of it was in regards to my family. So even though my kids and my parents know I have bipolar, and especially my parents have had to go through some pretty hellish times with me before I learned to get this under control, I had to have all of them read it. Anybody who was in the book. Before you put out a memoir, it is suggested if you are using their name, they have the opportunity to either change their name or use their name. So the people in my life read it. And again, I got a good response. My mom was a bit hesitant about seeing this all out there, but I think it was more bringing up memories for her. For my kids, that was going to be odd. They were going to learn more about me than most kids know about their parents. So I was actually more concerned about putting it out there to those close to me than I was to the people that I don't know who might pick it up on Amazon or Kobo or Kindle and not know who I am.
And considering this is World Bipolar Day and we're talking about stigma, has that changed for you now regarding people's opinion?
You know, it's funny that some of my close friends who read it, who did know about this, recently I was on a trip with some. I'm quite heavily into cycling, and one of my friends whose house I was staying at, we were staying at an Airbnb, a few of us. Further down in my story, it talks about when I kind of tried to go off my meds and it didn't end up well, and part of it was lithium, a common medication in bipolar. It kind of kills your thyroid. And you need to take your thyroid medication separated from your others. So he had this question, do we need to leave more time in the morning so you can have a gap between it? And I thought, how thoughtful of him is that to think of that. And another friend recently said something, because of what I read in your book, I know that you may have forgotten this because of ECT, electric shock therapy. Maybe you forgot this. And that meant a lot to me, actually. So they knew this and were trying to help me from it.
Well, I really acknowledge your courage and, your bravery to put a book out there that I think people need to read. There's not a lot of them. There's not a lot of memoirs about someone's journey with bipolar disorder. So, just recognizing that takes a lot of courage to do that. And I'm glad you did. I'd like to know a little bit more about yourself before the diagnosis, before the hospitalizations. What was life like? And, as a therapist, and as I mentioned to you, I specialize in bipolar. I believe that there is an environmental component in addition to the hereditary gene and the biological part of bipolar, is that there are experiences when we're younger that may attribute to it. I'm just wondering if you experienced that.
This is a tough question for me because I'm going to say I grew up in that idyllic, upper middle class life with parents who loved me and were around, and I got to participate in extracurricular activities. So that's something that actually gives me guilt that I grew up in this way. So where does this come from?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's a bit of an odd thing because I can't think of something, but at the same time, I have a lot of memory gaps from when I was young, from before the age of 10. And when I talk about my family, and in the book, I talk a lot about my dad and the supportiveness. But when I talk about my dad, that's actually my stepdad who adopted and raised me from the age of 6 and has done a wonderful job of it. So obviously, I don't really know my father, my birth father, by choice. The few times I've met him, I've chosen not to. But that side of the family, there's some weirdness going on. There's, alcoholism. There's different stories I've heard. My half brother is a shaman living in a commune in Mexico. Maybe he's a shaman. I'm not going to rule that out. It exists. But just some odder behavior, or my cousin's kids have some mental health. And see, I am using the mental health word, but my cousin's daughter was hospitalized for 4 months for an eating disorder. That's beyond mental health. My cousin's son, so this is all in the same bloodline. In Switzerland, you have to go in the military as a male, and he was dismissed for depression. So there is definitely, and as you know, it is shown to have a genetic component. I'm knocking on wood that my kids they're in their 20s, and that's kind of passing the age where it often shows up. I've seen no signs, and they both study psychology in university, interestingly. So I am pretty happy on that because I do know. Do you know the statistic genetically?
I don't think it's very high, actually. I think I read something around like 10 to 20%, but it doesn't explain.
I agree. Yeah.
It doesn't explain what has to happen for that. And I just see that they're prone. Once again, what we're talking about today, education and understanding and looking after ourselves, looking after our mental health, as you say, is extremely important.
Yeah, I'm just flipping through my book because I do have that statistic in there. And I do think you're about right. It is like something like 10 to 20% if one parent has bipolar. It is somewhere in that.
Now, I understand you have bipolar 2, right?
Yeah, I've received both diagnoses.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Well, I have had 2 psychotic episodes, and that's what would put it as bipolar 1. But 2 others are bipolar 2 because it's generally just been hypomania. I do believe those episodes were created by too much medication. I was being seen by a psychiatrist. I think I was on 5-6 medications at the time. Of course, that's going to mess with your brain, right? There's no way that will not. So I don't want to say that was due to bipolar 1 because that's what changes the diagnosis, correct? Is the level of mania as opposed to hypermania or having psychosis with it. So I'm going to go with bipolar 2 because that's what I feel suits me more. I have been learning that they're recently in the DSM-5 having a spectrum of it now.
I was just going to mention that. Yes. I'm leaning more towards that it's a spectrum because each of the clients that I have, I can see 2 people back to back with bipolar 1, but both of them entirely different. So yeah, what do you know about the spectrum and what do you think about it?
I just learned it in doing some research for my book because I was trying to put research in there so it's not just a memoir, but also educating people. And why wouldn't we have a spectrum? We have a spectrum for autism. There's I don't know. I'm going to use diabetes as an example, but there's type 1, there's type 2.
Right.
Are there others? I don't know because I don't know that illness, but I believe it makes sense. I know a lot of people with bipolar, just through different groups I have done. I love groups, find them very helpful. And I definitely see a range of some people who are very successfully managing it and are, maybe a lawyer. And then others who have been on ODSP their entire lives, unable to work. So there is a big spectrum in between there. I think I fall somewhere in the middle of that.
I think that the DSM-5, for those of you that may not know, is a diagnostic manual that psychiatrists and doctors look at to diagnose. I really question if it's, healthy for us to look at it in a label, right? I wonder if, and there has been talk about this, I wonder what your thought is, a return to some of the wording that was used many years ago of a manic depressive disorder or something to that effect rather than bipolar disorder. But then again, it just comes down to that. I really question if it's right to put a label on somebody when really, as I'm not a doctor, but as a therapist, I'm treating the impact of bipolar disorder, the symptoms of, rather than, treating this label. What are your thoughts?
That's an interesting question, and it's one that does seem to be brought up more often. In regards to the manic depressive, I don't love that term, but I'm sure you know the author Kay Redfield Jamison. She was probably one of the first books, and she's a psychiatrist and has bipolar 1. Her books are amazing. She has another book, I can't remember, but it's about suicide, and it's such a stigmatized topic. So that's a great book because the bipolar has a 20% rate of suicide, of what they call successful suicide. Mm-hmm. That's 1 in 5. So she prefers the term manic depression from what I read. I don't. Although I wish people would stop throwing around, oh, the weather's bipolar. Oh, I'm moody today. I'm so bipolar. No. Yes.
Yeah, no.
Trust me, it's so much more life-altering than that.
It's your thoughts of bipolar as a label.
Okay, yeah. So,
are we doing an injustice to the person by slapping a label on them?
For me, I would say it has helped me because I believe knowledge is power. So the more I can read about bipolar, the more I can watch YouTube videos about bipolar, the more research I can learn about bipolar, having that diagnosis helps me. Or if I need to describe to somebody, I've always been on a need-to-know basis when I let people know about this. And that comes down probably to some of my shame and self-stigma. But maybe it lets them go and research it a little bit as well. When I have needed medical help, in 2023, I was hospitalized after a long bout of not being hospitalized. Being able to come in there with saying I have bipolar, I think that gets you treatment a little bit faster in the ER because they're not needing to figure out what's going on. It's like, okay, there's been this 25 years with this label. And one other thing to say, when somebody is in crisis like that, there is something that I did in a bipolar group through the hospital. So again, having these groups with that label helps. And it's called a life chart. And even just a life event. Is there a divorce? What happened after? I noticed any major stressor in my life, I had an episode after.
Okay. Related to it, yeah.
So I had this document that I then put in Word bullet points. And it was my GP who sent me straight to the ER. But instead of having to, in crisis, relay everything that of my life history, it's hand this piece of paper. They were relieved and I was relieved. So that's something I'd encourage.
I haven't heard of this before. I appreciate you letting me know. It's called a life chart.
It's a life chart. I do have a couple of links at the end of each chapter in my book. I've concluded with a CBT or a DBT exercise. And because I found that so helpful, because the medical system doesn't track your life. It just tracks, what is happening now. Nobody knows your history. It's a great tool to save you the stress of having to think of something when you're in a moment of, for me, in suicidality in that moment. I don't know my life history.
Yeah. A lot of clients complain like, oh my God, I got to tell my whole history over and over again. And you're right. I think that if there's a need for a life chart, a need for people to, write this down and hand it over, like why aren't we in Canada at a point where you go in to a hospital, the person's suicidal, and they pull up the chart and here's the whole history. We really should be there by now, don't you think?
It's 2025. We absolutely should be. And I didn't even know how bad this tracking is. I have a friend of mine who actually works at the hospital that I was hospitalized at. And I asked her a question recently because I had asked for some notes, and you can't get notes from psychiatry without the approval, whereas you can get notes on a heart issue or any other test you had. But I was able to get not my notes, but just the ER notes. And that's where I saw it had bipolar 1. And I was like, I don't know if I like this. I think I have bipolar 2. And she said, you know what? If you were to come in for surgery, they can't access those notes unless they specifically go. Like your same hospital, they're not going to have access to those notes unless they specifically go into the mental health, as they call the ward now, not the psychiatry ward, into that system. That system doesn't have access to that unless they choose to look into it, which blew my mind. Same hospital.
Wow. There's a lot of gaps, eh?
Oh, huge gaps.
I'd like to circle back to stigma, because that's the topic for today regarding World Bipolar Day is looking at, as we said, reducing the stigma. We talked briefly when we first met about self-stigma, and I think that you've done some work there. Wonder if you can kind of share why you struggle with self-stigma. I would think that once you're diagnosed and once you saw the label, which you said was helpful, I imagine that a person wouldn't have self-stigma, but you struggled with that.
I struggle with it a lot. I have a therapist that I see, on and off as I need to. And every time she wants to get into my shame and stigma that I feel. And every time I say, maybe next time, because I know it's going to hurt. And I just carry this with me. And I'm hoping so thank you for having me on your podcast. I'm hoping as I talk about it more, I'm hoping as the book gets out there more. I recently did a talk at a nonprofit organization. And so that was face to face. And I got a wonderful response. So that lessened my self-stigma a bit. I didn't know the term self-stigma until recently. There is a website called IBF, International Bipolar Foundation, IBPF. You've heard of it?
Yeah.
And I get their newsletter, and every once in a while they send out studies that you can join. There was a study from a university in California on self-stigma. And I thought, this sounds like me. So I learned more about self-stigma and realized I have a lot of self-stigma, which could be me thinking that I can't do something. It could be when I decided to write the book, me going, well, is this hypomania? Because I have started so many businesses that I have, some of them just so ridiculous, businesses that I started in hypomania and then, of course, dropped, right? Once reality hit. So thinking, well, is this just another one of these? Because I'm trying to really stop that. So that's self-stigma right there.
And limiting, right? Yeah.
And limiting. Maybe I wouldn't have written the book. But I decided to continue as I am trying to doubt myself less. I have a tattoo on my arm that says, it has the semicolon, which most people know is for mental health, mental illness, suicide awareness. And beside it, I have actually, I can, because I doubt myself so much. So that's another way that I'm trying to trust in myself a little bit more. In my copy of my book, where I write my own things, I wrote a little note to myself. I'm just opening it to read it. To me, remember, you can do more than you think. Take a deep breath and feel your heart open. And I need that reminder. So that's self-stigma. And it can be limiting, as you said, to what we think we can do and what we think our bipolar can hold us back from.
Why shame? You mentioned shame and stigma. Where's the shame?
I have shame. I know this is something in the brain chemically. I know CAT scans are showing differences in the brain in people with bipolar. So I know I should not have shame, but I have shame. And I think a lot of people will have shame over things that they did in episodes, whether it was depression or whether it was hypomania. People with mania can do some terrible things, right? There's hypersexualization. There's people spending lots of money on businesses, gambling, getting involved with the police. So
alcohol, drugs as well.
Alcohol, drugs, mania can cause a lot of things that people afterwards feel shame about, even though they didn't have the control at that moment. I think a lot of my shame comes from what I put my parents through. My first suicide attempt was at age 16. Even though I'm not going to call that one was a typical cry for help. But my parents had no idea I was feeling this way. This is where I was starting to feel my brain was different at age 16, and I didn't know how to ask for help. So this is what I did. Took a bunch of pills, called a friend, because I didn't want to die. I just wanted help. And, my parents are great. They did get me help. But by the time I was seen by a psychiatrist months later, as the weight is, I was feeling better. All right. I was done. I was good. I'm on the gymnastics team now. I'm, on the drama club. My grades are up. That's an indication of bipolar starting to brew. Right. So I think after a couple other suicide attempts in my 20s, my parents probably didn't think I would live to see 30. And as a parent now myself, I carry huge guilt around that. Part of the guilt and the shame comes from because I didn't take responsibility for myself at that age. I was in and out of hospital, probably because I would go into a depression episode, end up in hospital, might take my meds regularly. Of course, there was a lot of experimenting with meds. Do better, get released, stop medication, and cycle repeats, right? So I carry guilt about that. Maybe if I had done differently, maybe I would have finished school. Maybe I'd have a job now, a real job. I'm a fitness instructor. I've done this and that, but I've never managed to work full time. So maybe I'd have a different life. So the shame and the guilt comes from that.
I see. And that's ongoing. You're still working on that?
I am. Yeah.
I've heard that in clients as well. My thoughts at this point is, why don't we do an education piece? Yes, I work with people with bipolar, but I am still learning. I don't have all the answers, but I think there's common questions I think listeners probably would want to know. And I think considering that this whole day is about education, I'll fire a couple questions at you I think that people are wondering about. What is mania?
Well, there is hypomania and there is mania, right? And that's where often type 1 would be mania, type 2 would be hypomania. And as I said, in type 1, people can get into a lot of trouble, often ending up with police. We had talked about this, that sometimes the police do need to be involved in order to get the person help. But people's lives can be ruined by mania if they have an affair. Hypersexuality is a symptom from that. Spending a lot of money. People can go into debt. They can take their family's money. I'm trying to think of a few others here. Businesses, right?
A lot of big ideas.
A lot of big ideas of what you can do. Grandiosity.
And a lot of energy that goes with it, sure.
A lot of energy goes with it, and lack of sleep. I know for me, if I have lack of sleep, that just triggers more of a spiral. So even in hypomania, sleep will become difficult for me. I won't need as much sleep. So I can speak more of my own symptoms here in hypomania. I think my husband likes to tell me I'm buzzing, and I do feel like my body's vibrating from the inside. There's so much energy that wants to get out. This is when I'm going to go on Indeed.ca and start applying for jobs because now I think, you know what, I can handle a full-time job. So let me apply for a few jobs here. That's definitely a thing. My base personality is a very bubbly, happy, social personality to begin with. So some people, and I actually learned in a group recently, there's a term, maybe if you can, hyperthymia, where people with bipolar apparently do tend to run in a bit of a higher state in general. So maybe we are a little bit more excitable. We are a little bit more bubbly. And obviously this won't apply to anybody. But when I heard this term, I thought, Awesome. Because we were talking about the good things of bipolar, right? There's some good things.
Mm-hmm.
Creativity comes up with one. So my symptoms, I definitely feel that energy building in my body and wanting to get out. Even just from talking to you, you probably can tell I'm a chatty person. But I am going to talk faster. I'm going to interrupt people more. I'm going to switch faster from topic to topic because the other person's talking too slow. They're not understanding. They're not getting it. I know the answer now. Let me just keep talking.
A lot of people understand bipolar from movies. Right, and shows, series on TV. There's been quite a lot, and what really bothers me when I see it, because I grew up with it, I never saw it. I saw in Mania exactly what you're talking about, and a lot of energy, and sometimes an irritability and an anger. But in these movies, the person with bipolar seems to be someone to be feared, someone that's dangerous, and I imagine you would disagree with that.
I definitely would disagree with that.
I do too.
Yeah. I mean, I think even if somebody gets to a state, as can happen, of irritability and anger, and I think that's often because the people around you in your mind are too slow. They're not getting it, or they're telling you, they're telling you, oh, are you on your meds? They're telling you things you don't want to hear because you think you're just doing great. You're feeling, especially in hypomania, you just feel great, right? Like there's not quite.
My clients love it.
Yes, exactly, and that's where often, hypomania is great, but it's often going to be followed by a depression. So movies, you're right, very little depict it correctly. I was mentioning to you earlier, the only one I have seen, and I looked it up, there's a series called Modern Love, and I think it was on Prime, but I'm sure you can Google it. Every episode is different, but in episode 3, Anne Hathaway is in it, and it is the most accurate depiction I have ever seen because she's in hypomania. And it has a wonderful ending. I'm not going to spoil it, but again, a realistic ending to how this can be controlled. And I also love the fact that she's a lawyer in this.
Okay. Yeah.
Because we can have good careers. We can do a lot. We just have to find out our triggers. Well, for me, to find out my triggers, which is stress and sleep, jet lag. I think the time change actually affected me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I have to say, a couple days later, I wasn't sleeping well. My husband's away this week. I ordered 3 pairs of shoes at 2 a.m. And I was like, wait, is that 1 hour of time change doing it? Or did I want those 3 pairs of shoes?
Well, that leads me to, I want to know your take on people's opinion regarding, other parts of bipolar, but it does kind of, makes me think about balance and consistency is something that I talk to my clients about. I use what they call interpersonal and social rhythm therapy. And the whole theory around that is time changes, flight, with jet lag. Apparently, flying east has more of an impact on people with bipolar. But one thing that I encourage people to take a look at is if they know that there is a time change coming up, to prepare for it. And basically any changes in their life that, if they know it's coming, to be prepared for it. But it's the changes in life that we don't know coming that make a huge impact, losing a job. But the whole idea is, with the circadian system that we have is more sensitive for people with bipolar, that there's a need for balance and consistency and a knowledge that something as simple as you said, the time change can have an effect. Have you found that the last couple of years, you've been dealing, well with bipolar, that sometimes changes in your lifestyle throw things off?
I think I have dealing well. Once my kids were born, they're in their early 20s now, I had a huge motivation to stay well because I wasn't just responsible for myself. And I even had periods of that time where I was off medication for periods and doing well. Fitness is a huge part of my life for doing well, and that can help with both the excess energy and the low energy. Even if I have to drag myself, I have recognized that helps. And I mean, some people mood log, right? A daily mood log. But there's another thing that I learned in one of my groups, and it's activity planning. Have you heard of this? Where you plan an activity or even just doing an activity. So let's just say going out for a walk. When you're depressed, when I'm depressed, I have a hard time going cycling, even though I love it, because I cycle all out, right? I've got my special shoes. I've got my special outfit. I've got a bike computer. I've got everything. That's overwhelming. I can't do that. But I can go for a walk. And if I rate my score out of 10 before and after, it's going to be higher. So I've learned a lot of life tricks along the way. So I do think I am doing well. I'm thriving-ish. And that's why I use that term. I don't
I love that word.
claim, thriving-ish. My highs and lows are more of like this kiddie roller coaster as opposed to one of those huge up and down roller coasters. They're pretty manageable. And I know what to do. I know how to anticipate it coming. So like you said, jet lag, a flight, I have to kind of plan for that and prepare for that because I do know that affects me. After doing well for many years, in 2017, I came back from France. And I think that set off a manic episode, a hypomanic episode. I'm quite sure, looking back.
It can. Yeah.
Yes, I'm quite sure. And then I started to spiral from there. I started to really, for the next few years, have a hard time playing around with medication, going back to therapy, going back to a psychiatrist. I think that triggered this whole wave. I have gone back to using my tricks. As I said, in 2023, I was hospitalized on a Form 1. So if people don't know what that is, that means it's against your will. And that was... I was close to psychosis. I had this idea of walking out on the ice of my cottage, and then suddenly and with taking Zopiclone sleeping pills, I had it planned: 3 gin and tonics, 12 sleeping pills, and I thought 12 steps onto the ice would break me into the ice. So that's a pretty scary thing to have that in-depth a plan. And then I started to really lose it because the ice was melting and I thought I wouldn't be able to complete my plan. So showing up at my doctor's like, the ice is melting. I don't have time. I've had to change the lake. That's where she's like, you're going to the hospital. So let's circle back to what your question was.
We're talking about mania, and just to help people understand a little bit more about it. And no, you're on the right track, because the question comes to mind is that some people may not understand what psychosis is in bipolar, and should a family member be afraid of that happening, or what are the signs that someone is going into psychosis?
Yeah, so that I think I was on my way to. I think if I hadn't been put in the hospital, I think I was on my way to psychosis, because I was starting to have all these beliefs about the lake and about my body under the ice, and my thoughts were completely starting to get skewed. And as far as psychosis goes, I think the only other episode, and this might have been where I was changed to the type 1, but then back to type 2 later. And I would also love to discuss at some point how my bipolar diagnosis came about, because people do not know that, how it often comes about. But I believed I was in the newspaper. And I was having an outpatient appointment with my psychiatrist. At the time, they had those free newspapers that they have at the hospital. And I thought I saw an article about myself and about how great I was and how I was healed. And I was going to be interviewed and kind of world renowned. And I took the paper to my psychiatrist when I had my appointment. And of course, the article wasn't in there. And so now I'm leaving his office. Well, it's in one of the other ones. It was in there. So that was definitely, I did believe that I had seen that article.
I've come across that with clients as well that have bipolar 2. They can have experiences of full-blown mania and psychosis. And once again, that kind of harks back to our original discussion about labeling and type 1 or type 2 and all these types of things that, I've seen that. Some of the bipolar 2 could have some of these experiences. Let's talk about depression for a moment. And then I'd like to get to the point of your life. I believe you're age 23 when you're diagnosed, right?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to come back to that because, like you said, I am interested, and I read a bit about that in your book and how the diagnosis happened. But let's talk about the other side of bipolar depression. Are we talking the same type of depression that most people have, or a different type of depression when we talk about bipolar depression?
I think most people who have not experienced depression do not understand depression, whether it's bipolar depression or depression. They think you're sad. You can snap yourself out of it. They don't understand that there's actually perhaps no reason for the depression, right? So that's very frustrating to them. There could be a trigger for sure. There could be a trigger. There could be a reason. But we take that reason much out of proportion. I have rapid cycling bipolar. So in some ways, I am lucky that neither, I'm going to say 4 days to max 2 weeks to a week. Because I've learned tools, I can actually nip it in the bud right now. And like I said, it's going to be really hard to drag myself out of bed to go for a walk. But I do know now I need to do that. But at the same time, your body feels 1,000 pounds in bed. It is so heavy. You physically feel like you can't get your legs out of bed. I remember my husband a couple of years ago, because I couldn't, and I had to go teach a fitness class. And I do know I will feel better after that. Him picking up my legs and pulling them off the bed. And then I said, I can't stand up. I can't stand up. And him going to the closet, pulling out clothes that he thinks I'm going to need to get dressed, helping me stand up because I couldn't. I just couldn't. And driving me to the gym, to teach my class. And then once I started, the music, the energy from the participants, it helped. But I said, people don't understand. I just want to see if I had... from a book that I had read a few things of, there was an excellent, I'm trying to see if I can find it, description of depression from somebody. And she was saying, her example is she's snorkeling with her family and friends, and they're saying, look at the colorful fish, feel how warm the water is. And she is at the bottom of the ocean under cement in darkness, not able to see the fish, not like annoyed at them. There's no fish. There's no warmth. I'm in the same spot as you, but I feel cold and heaviness. And I feel like that's a good description.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that people can't understand. Having difficulty for me making decisions, even what to eat is difficult. So you know what? I'm just going to eat a protein bar because I can't decide what to eat if somebody doesn't make me food. The tears that come out of nowhere, even if something good is happening. I could say I remember a couple of years ago when I was in a depression, and I was driving to go to a massage. This should be good. I was bawling. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to leave the house to go. Forced myself to go because I have it booked. It's going to be charged no matter what. Bawling the entire time. I didn't want to go to this massage. Like, this should be good. But I was dreading it.
Do you feel that your experience of the depression is deeper and more difficult than someone that would have like clinical depression or what they call unipolar depression?
I don't want to minimize their experience. And I also feel, as somebody with rapid cycling, somebody with unipolar, or I don't want to call it regular depression, but it can go on
clinical
a lot
depression,
longer.
yeah.
Clinical depression, thank you.
Yeah.
It can go on a lot longer, I think. Whereas I do know for me, this is going to end. It doesn't feel like it at the time. I'm going to say when I'm in hypomania, yes, this is going to be me forever. This is why I should apply for a job. This is why I should start a business. This is why I'm going to schedule an outing with my friend next week and the following week, because I'm going to feel like this forever. When I'm in depression, I have a hard time seeing it's going to end. When I'm in euthymia, which is a normal state, yeah, I'm going to feel like this forever. This is me. And I'm pretty fortunate now that that's 80% of the time for me.
You mentioned rapid cycling, and I read that in your book. When you're diagnosed, you were diagnosed with bipolar 2 with rapid cycling. But for those that don't know what rapid cycling is, I'm sure they get an idea by, from what you shared. But how would you define rapid cycling?
The clinical term is, I think that it's minimum of 4 days. It's four episodes within a year. Am I correct with that?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, but it can be as short as 4 days. I have heard from people saying it can be faster, ultra rapid cycling. I have heard that, but it's not what people might think, like, oh, you're up now and then in an hour you're down. And that's going to be moodiness, I'm going to say, right? Whereas this is coming out of, I can wake up and I know this is physically impossible, but the weight of my brain feels like it's changed to heavier or lighter. Like I physically feel that. I'm sure there's some hormonal chemical thing that has changed. I understand my brain weighs the same. And I am at the point where I can start to feel this coming on. I start to feel a cluttering in my brain. And I start to go, oh, okay, I need to start paying attention. What's going on? I'm starting to be able to catch this before. And this has taken 30 years.
You mentioned euthymia, which I think is really important to talk about before we move on. How would you describe that? Because I let people know that, once again, it's, the label, isn't the greatest, because people think of, well, for the rest of my life, I'm going to be either up or down. I'm going to either be in manic or, I'm going to be in a depressive episode. There's never going to be stability for me. There's no middle ground. So I always talk about that. There is the higher side, hypomania and mania. There's depression. But many people are very, very successful and move on with their lives because they found periods of euthymia. And how would you describe that based on your experience? I'm
going to imagine that euthymia is how most people live their lives. That's what I think, as a person who's never maybe lived life without bipolar. So what you talk about at the beginning of having that thought that it's just going to be this cycling up and down and not being able to hold a job and losing friends, maybe a marriage or a relationship disappearing. I had probably a decade of that. And then I had just mentioned, I think I spend 80% of my time in euthymia at this point. And that's
important for people to hear.
Yeah, it is. I work pretty hard at it. One of my friends, when I sometimes feel bad that I only work part-time and I feel a little resentful, but the stage where people began their career in their 20s, I was just trying to stay alive. I was trying to stay out of the hospital. So I missed that. And that's hard to come back from, right? These gaps in resumes. So she said, yeah, but you put so much effort. You have a part-time job of staying well and you're succeeding at it. So it's definitely possible. And it's possible to do it with a full-time job as well, with some work and finding what works for you. I mentioned I love group programs. They are definitely helpful for me. CMHA, Canadian Mental Health Association, has online and in-person groups, and they have locations throughout Canada. I just recently joined, but it's going to be my first bipolar group next week, Ontario Mood Disorders Association, because it's an online one. So can't tell you much about that, but I was looking for something else. So those are good for me. Sleep, stress, exercise. And as much as I often think about going off medication, I think I need to try to stay on it. And I supplement with natural things. So those keep me in euthymia, that whole combination.
So in your book, A Sparkling Tornado, you mentioned that you were 23 when you're diagnosed. How did that happen? Well, what led up to that?
Okay, so usually people with bipolar are not going to go to the doctor when they're feeling amazing, right? Why would you? You feel great. You don't want anybody to stop this. And you think this is just who you are. I mentioned at 16, this is when I started to feel that my brain was different. That's actually how I would explain it. That's a very typical time for symptoms to start appearing, is in the teens, although it can vary. The average age of the average time of diagnosis, and I don't know if this is Canada or worldwide, is 7 years. And this is a few reasons. In Canada, it's certainly the slowness of our healthcare system. It's due to the difficulty, right? We don't have, while there's starting to be brain scans being out there, there's not a blood test. So, you do a lot of talking to people, to psychiatrists, you fill out forms. I laugh at these forms because ask me to fill out a form last year when I'm feeling euthymic. I'm going to answer all neutral answers. Ask me to fill it out. Like using the example when I was in 2023, when I went to see my doctor to get back on medication, but she's like, no, you're going. Before going to her office, I had to fill out a depression rating scale. I was a 10 on everything. And I think I just scrawled instead of my name, I want to die on it. Wow. If I was to have filled out that form another time, it wouldn't be like that. And same when they ask you questions for mania. Do you have racing thoughts? Do you like this? It depends when you ask me. So that's part of the difficulty. Before I learned how to manage and before I found medication and my own self-help things, I self-harmed. I cut myself. So that made them go, young woman, self-harm, must be borderline personality disorder.
Unfortunately, swings, that's what they jump to, yeah.
That's what they jump to. Until in a depression, they put me on Prozac, an antidepressant. And in bipolar, typically, somebody with bipolar should never be on just an antidepressant. Because that's
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah. And that's often how a diagnosis comes about. You go from depressed, not to feeling good, but to feeling, woohoo, great. I think I ended up at my house of one of the things. I painted the walls horizontally in multiple colors with no painting tape, just wavy painting the walls and then something else. And then when I was at my doctor's, I had stopped the medication because obviously I was feeling so great. But then in describing the symptoms, they're like, you know what, let's try lithium. And I believe lithium is only used for bipolar. Is it used for anything else?
I believe so.
It's only used for bipolar, and it worked. So it was the combination of an antidepressant putting me into mania, hypomania, and lithium working. And I'm still on it to this day. It's always been a go-to, even though I take, throughout the time I've added other ones off or on. But if lithium works, that's a pretty good sign that you have bipolar. If an antidepressant put you over the edge and over the top, that's a pretty good sign that you have bipolar. So that's one of the DSM-5 has different criteria that they're going to go by as well, but that's a sign as well. And that's what did it for me.
A large part of your book, you share, once again, acknowledging the courage to talk about it, a lot of hospitalizations and experiences in hospitals. What was your experience, and how did you cope with it? How did you get past it?
I'm going to say a lot of it is forgotten because of medications, a lot of antipsychotics and electric shock therapy. Those all affect your memory. How did I cope with it? I was in a first marriage at that point. I'm in a second now, and I'm very fortunate that he was very understanding and very helpful. My parents were very good. They lived in a different city. They lived in Mississauga, which is about 2 hours away from London, Ontario, but came every week. Sorry, they came every week. How did I cope with it? I lost every single friend that I had in what I'm going to call my before years, and that hurt.
Oh, really? What happened?
Yeah. I'm a very social person, so that really hurt. Well, they were moving upwards and onwards in life. And I was in and out of hospital. I was not doing well. I was not a good friend because I couldn't be. So that is something that really hurt. And the friends I made were I call them frequent flyers, those of us in and out of hospital, because they understood. They were going through the same thing, and those were the people who I related to. Staff is pretty good. The people who work in the mental health, you're going to obviously have some who aren't, but a lot are there because they want to be. It takes a special person to be there. It was hard. It was hard being in and out because I couldn't maintain a regular life. And I think my longest day was 3 months. And a lot were on Form 1s. Then you sometimes get put on a Form 3, which is you're now held for 14 days minimum. And then you can stay voluntarily, right?
For someone listening that, has been diagnosed with bipolar, often they have a lot of fear about hospitalization. And once again, a lot of this comes back to society and movies about what psychiatric facilities are like, or, mental health facilities. They used to be called, the psych wards. And I remember reading your book about London psychiatric, which, goes back a number of years of how the system was. But my question is, for people that are listening that have a fear of what it's like in a facility like that, what was your experiences, and what is the stigma around how we see these places?
So I can say that from in the 90s, when I was in the hospital, to now, they have changed a lot. There wasn't a lot to do when I was in there before. A couple of years ago, when I was in for 10 days, and I left kind of against their suggestion, but I was desperate to be outside. And it was actually a mistake to leave that early, I recognize now. We had 4 groups a day, and it was anything from yoga. We had a courtyard they could take us outside to. There was CBT and DBT programs. So there was a lot of education going on as well. In regards to the stigma, I had one friend visit me, it was it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But at the beginning, I told my husband I didn't want anybody to see me. I was not in the state probably for visitors either. It took a few days to get back to, being able to have a normal conversation. My kids did come visit me, but I waited a good week before I wanted them to come visit me. Stigma, so I don't know if my in-laws family, if I will have them listen to this or not. That's where I feel, I don't want to say stigma, but I feel a misunderstanding from them. So they take away your phone when you go to the hospital, right? But you are given a chance to write down a few numbers and be able to call from the ward phone. I see my in-laws frequently, but we don't talk about this. This is kind of a taboo subject to talk about. So I did call my sister-in-law a lot because I was just always crying and whoever I could get a hold of, but nobody came to visit me. And I know if I had a broken leg, they would have come to visit me. I was also desperate for good food. So I left a message one day with her saying, I'm allowed visitors. And if anybody comes, please bring food. And my niece came to visit. But otherwise, I felt a little bit hurt from that. I had to interview my husband a bit for writing the last chapter of the book about all of this because I had a lot of blanks of memory from around this time. And he said, well, you told me you didn't want anybody to visit. But that was just the beginning. Once I was feel better, of course I wanted visitors. I was, apart from him, of course I wanted visitors. And especially I wanted food. So there was that stigma. And I missed in that family an uncle's funeral when I was in the hospital. And it was just told Sandra's sick. There was not Sandra's in the hospital. Sandra's, had a breakdown. Sandra's sick. Mm-hmm. So that wasn't, again, super discussed. So honestly, where I feel I don't want to say stigma, misunderstanding is that side of the family. Perfect example was they know the book came out. I wasn't going to even tell them, but I started an Instagram page, A Sparkling Tornado. And you know how social media is. Suddenly it went to my niece, to my sister-in-law, even though I was keeping it private. So I was like, okay, I've got to tell them. And we had a family dinner yesterday, a family lunch, and everybody knows the book came out. Nobody said a word. And again, if I'd gotten a new job, they'd be like, how's your new job going? Nobody said, hey, how is the book going? Or I'd love to read the book. It hurts. I didn't say anything, but I thought nobody's going to bring this up that I've had this book published and it's even now going to be in chapters for order. That's a big deal.
Oh, really? Great
my local library has accepted it. That's a big deal, but nobody's asked. So I haven't told them, but I think it's just an uncomfortableness on their part, not a stigma, but a lack of education. And this is where hopefully World Bipolar Day takes away that uncomfortableness from people, and that lack of knowledge and understanding, or that fear. Do they think if they ask me, I'm going to break down in tears? It's actually the opposite. Maybe I'll break down in tears because they didn't ask.
You found your own inspiration and ways to cope. I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but for someone that is recently diagnosed, which is a lot of the clients that I see, and I know what goes through their mind, what would you say to somebody listening that was just recently diagnosed? What hope would you be able to provide them based on your experience gaining hope in your own life?
Yeah. And I don't want to use the cliche that there is hope. I actually want to say it's going to be a tough journey for a few years. It is going to be a tough journey for a few years. But during that journey, use every bit of help you can find. It's hard. If people are waiting for the Ontario healthcare system to help them, that's going to be difficult. Not everybody can afford private therapy, but if you can use that, I know you're into some alternative therapies. I think that's pretty cool. I might talk to you more about that actually privately. That interests me. But look into the free resources. I think you said you might list them at the bottom of this podcast on my website, sandrasteiner.com. My last page is resources, and I think I have about 4 on there of free ways to get counseling. And they're also usually pretty quick. Like CMHA, you could see them next week, right? So there's some quick ways as well to fill those gaps. Use those. And I hate to say this, but social media has some good things now. This didn't exist. And if you are newly diagnosed, look up as much stuff as you can and then try to cipher through, like, I don't know, don't go to Kanye West's TikTok page. Like, he's not a good example. Right. But there are a lot of others out there. Books are a great source because they tend to be vetted a bit more. I love workbooks. Mind Over Mood, you and I talked about. I think that one is a good one as well. And the more people, if you can learn to get over your self-stigma, your shame, I think the more people you disclose to, I heard a quote, only disclose when you get something out of it. I found the people I have chosen to disclose to, I have generally had a warm response. And I gave a couple of examples where it's actually helped me, that they have an understanding and saying, you know what, like I can get overwhelmed socially. We have a cottage, and if we have people there, 2 days is my max. But sometimes I need to leave and put on my headphones in my bedroom and just watch something alone for a bit. And I'll come back out an hour later. I'm overwhelmed socially.
Overstimulated, really?
Overstimulated, because that can be, I think, a lot, right? So if you have people you trust, let them know and they might help you through it. Does that sound like some good advice?
Absolutely. I couldn't add anything more to that. What about family members? I work with a lot of family members, and, I grew up, I think it was about 13 in my family when my older sister was diagnosed. And back then, in the late 70s, there wasn't a lot of information. There wasn't a lot of ways to kind of access, is there any hope for this? But for family members who are listening today in 2025, what would you say to them regarding hope?
My dad summed it up pretty well. And I'm trying to remember his exact words. If you're on Kobo and you go to my book, he wrote a review from a parent's point of view. I think I actually put it on my website as well. He wrote it from a parent's point of view of that. And he says that there is hope, because I think in my 20s, they didn't think I would live to see 30. Now they see me as a mother. And I think I'm a good mother. I do think I'm a good mother. It
sounds like you are, yes.
I think I am a good friend to my friends. They probably give me more than I give them, but they're still good friends because they know I need a little more help. I try to be a good wife. I've been a fitness instructor for 25 years. And any job I do, because I do have the diagnosis of GAD, general anxiety disorder. Anxiety actually can make you a better employee because you tend to be over-prepared, right? You want to make sure that things are going to go well. So I think sometimes having that can help you in your job. So employers shouldn't be afraid. But to family, don't give up. don't say pick up your bootstraps. Negative comments are going to be harder. Don't dismiss talks of suicide. If anything, if somebody talks of suicide, ask specific questions. And to be honest, if when I've had thoughts of suicide, if anybody had actually, beside a medical professional, asked me deeper questions, it would have been a relief. In 2023, my husband got mad at me for talking about it. And he whips out his camera and is like, well, then you're going to make a video to your kids. You're going to make a video to your parents. And that devastated me. And I think a few hours later, he realized it was wrong. And I understand it's a point of fear. It's a point of anger. Why would you do this? So I do understand it. But that, if anything, made it worse. So to family members, take it seriously and take it kindly. Take it kindly.
Well said. Folks, the book is called A Sparkling Tornado, a memoir of living and thriving-ish with bipolar disorder. Any of this interview rings true for you and hits home. A great book to find. I read it. I always learn from people that have bipolar. I learned a lot reading the book from you. How can listeners find it?
So it is on the e-version on Kobo and Kindle. It will, in a couple of weeks, be available for special order on indigo.ca, or you could go to your chapters and they would order it. This is an interesting time because it came out on Amazon just as all this political stuff was happening. And some people are boycotting Amazon. Honestly, for me as an author, the easiest thing for me is if you order it from Amazon or ebook, I don't have to do anything. And please, thank you. Don't stress me out more. But this is what I would like to say for people who think that they're doing something good with not buying this book on Amazon. If you order it on Indigo or Chapters, believe it or not, it's printed in the US. And it's going to be shipped across the border and sent to your local chapters. Amazon. So when I wrote this book, I worked with a Canadian writing coach. I used a Canadian editor. I'm a Canadian author, and it's through Amazon printed in Bolton, Ontario. And then using your local Canadian courier to get it to you, right? So it's actually more helpful to the Canadian economy. So that's something politically people can choose, but those are the options to get it. And if you don't have a Kobo or a Kindle, you can just download the app on your tablet or phone and read it from there too. So
if they buy your book, they are buying Canadian.
100%. 100%. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. Everybody involved in it is Canadian, except for the printer from Chapters that's in the U.S.
Well, here on World Bipolar Day, I don't think I could have had a better guest. I was looking for someone that, I could interview that has personal experience, but also someone that I could talk to regarding stigma and where we are right now regarding people understanding what bipolar is and isn't. And we've covered a lot, I think, really, did the job. So much appreciated that you came on the show.
Thank you very much, Greg. Yep. I would like to finish World Bipolar Day with wishing a happy birthday to Vincent van Gogh, because we can only imagine how his life might have been different. It had been in this day where there was more of an understanding, medications that were helpful. Maybe he would have sold a piece of art, because I don't think he sold a single piece in his lifetime, right?
He sold a few, apparently.
Oh, okay.
But his success came many, 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 many years later, so he never saw that.
Yeah, so too bad he wasn't in this day and age where there's more options.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks again.
Thank you, Greg.
Be sure to like and follow us on all social media. And if you like what you hear, hit subscribe, download, and share with your friends. MindBody Matters is a great media production.